In this lesson, we'll add a piece of state to store the user's search term and then connect it to our text field component from Material UI. So whenever we're dealing with state, the available options that we have depend on the type of React component that we have. So here, of course, we have a functional component. So the obvious choice is to use the useState hook. That is the way that we store state in a functional React component. However, what we're going to do instead is transition this app React component to be a class component and use our old this.state syntax. The reason we're doing this right now is strictly for educational reasons. Later on in the next section, we're going to learn more details about class components, including things like side effects, which is basically how we do additional things inside the component, such as making an API request for some kind of data. And once again, I want to show you how we solved problems in React in both the older approach, which is class components, and then refactor to show you how we solve the same problem with a modern approach of hooks. And if we start building out everything with hooks now, it's going to be a lot harder to go in reverse. So what we're going to do is transform app to a class-based component. We're going to learn one way of solving these problems, then once again refactor and do it the exact same way with functional components. So we'll come back to this design a little bit later. And the good news is 95% of our code will stay the same. All we're going to need to do is just the class declaration syntax and then transfer our existing JSX that we've been writing to a render method. Let's do that right now. So at the very top of the file, I'm going to import React from React. And the reason I'm going to need that React object is because it is the one that has the component property that is the superclass that I need to inherit from in my new class React component. So right here, where I have function app, I'm going to remove this code and just write class app. And right here, it's going to be extends React component. We are subclassing the component class, which means we are inheriting all of its features. Now this code will start breaking, but not a problem. So in here, what I want to do is define a render method, provide those curly braces, and then we're simply going to copy our return keyword and all of our former JSX into here, paste that, let prettier do its job, and you can see on the right-hand side, everything remains exactly the same. So that was how we transitioned to a class-based React component. And then the next thing I want to do is to add some state to store the user's search term. Now, of course, we can declare a constructor method and do our this.state declaration in there. But as we know, a shortcut that is available to us thanks to Babel is to simply write state in line here. So here I can write state and assign it to whatever state I want. Usually it's going to be a JavaScript object. And in our case, this object will have a single property. I'm going to call it search term and provide it with the starting value of an empty string. Okay, so in order to associate this search term piece of state with our text field component, it's going to operate very similarly to our regular input field that we discussed a few lessons ago. So we're going to need to provide a value prop here, and that is going to be the current value inside the text field. And then we're also going to need to wire up a special prop called onChange, and onChange designates a function or method to run whenever the user types a character. It's the exact same approach that we had with a regular HTML input. The only difference is we're now passing this in as props to this text field component from Material UI. So here in the render method, I can destructure our search term state property, and that is going to come from this.state. That is the current value of search term, whatever it is. And whenever our state changes, React will rerun this render method to generate the most up-to-date JSX. So right here on text field, I'll provide a value prop. Doesn't matter where it goes. I'm just going to put it here. And I'm going to assign that to be search term. Okay. The other thing I need to add is an onChange prop. And that, of course, is going to be a reference to a function or a method. I'm going to assign this to a method that we will define in just a moment. And I will call it handle employee search. So once again, we are in a class, we are in an instance method. So now we do need to incorporate the this keyword. This was not a necessity when we were inside a functional React component, but now we are back in ES6 classes. So in order to reference an instance method on the instance, we need to use the this keyword. So above the render method, I will define that method, handle employee search. And to avoid the binding problems that we saw in a few lessons ago, we don't want to do this syntax. We want to use the new class property syntax by simply assigning handle employee search to be an arrow function. And this will ensure that we have the correct reference of the this keyword within the body of this method. This will correctly be equal to the component instance, which means it's going to have access to methods that we care about, such as setState. So just like with a regular input, the text field component will provide React's synthetic event object as the first parameter to the function or method that we provide to onChange. So we will have access to an event object right here. And on that event object, we are going to have .target.value to provide us with the most recent entry that the user has just provided within that input field. So I want to take this string, whatever it is, and I want to set that to be the new value of my search term piece of state. So within our class-based React component, we do that by invoking setState under this keyword, then providing an object where the properties represent the state properties that we want to update. In this case, the only property that I want to update and the only property we have is search term. And I will set its next value to be event.target.value. So every single time the user types a character or even presses, let's say, the backspace key, that will trigger the handle employee search method to run. We're going to use the event object to get that current entry. We're going to overwrite the search term piece of state. Because state has changed, React will trigger a re-render. That new value of the search term property will be destructured here and passed down to the value prop of the text field component, which in its internals will render it as the actual content on screen in the input field. So now here we can type in a sample employee name like Bob Value. We can see everything is appearing on screen. And if I go into my React DevTools in the browser, and go right here into components and click on my top level app component, which is where we actually defined that state. You can see right here that state and its property of search term is correctly set to Bob Value. And if I edit it here as well, for example, Bob Val, you can see it will also update the interface. So the data is binded in both directions. When the user interacts with the UI, that updates our component state. And when the component state updates, that updates the UI, so they are connected, and React is fully in control of all of the data, which is pretty easy now and advantageous because whenever we have to do something with this data, which in our case is going to be filtering the employee cards that we're going to add in a lesson or two, now that data belongs to React, it is up to date in React, and we don't need to reach into the DOM and find the input and extract the value from there. It exists within our JavaScript land, within this React component. So it's super simple and easy to pull out that search term piece of state in another method and then use it to filter the cards, as we'll see in a few lessons from now. But that's all there is to cover in this one. So I will see you in the next lesson.